Can you see the correct screen?
It's coming in. It comes in. Yes. Nice.
Perfect. All right. So I'm Meaghan Wetherell. I study Oreodonts, and I'm a professor at University of Arizona. And this is going to be a 20-minute talk of me trying to convince you to study Oreodonts and also draw them more, because they're actually pretty cool. All right. And I know that doesn't set us up at a strong start, but I swear they're very cool. So what is an Oreodont? Oreodonts, first off, they live for a super, super long time. They live from the Eocene up through the end of the Miocene. These are mammalian herbivores. They're ruminants. And if you're not familiar with ruminants, that's something that has 4 chambers in its stomach and likes to chew its own vomit. That is what cows are doing when they're chewing cud. They're chewing puke. And probably Oreodonts were also puke chewers. Lots of different types. This phylogenetic tree really dramatically underestimates the diversity, or possibly accurately captures it. Taxonomy in this group is about as bad as Spinosaurus, honestly. So if you do not live in North America, I'm so sorry, you don't have Oreodonts. That doesn't mean you can't study and draw them. You can, but they didn't ever make it outside of North America and a little bit in Central America. So pretty regionally limited. That said, in that area, just tons and tons of Oreodonts. They are absolutely everywhere. They are one of the most common animals throughout the Cenozoic of North America. Basically, they were the deer and the rabbits before there were deer and rabbits. And the base model looks something like this. This is your standard generic Oreodont package. It looks like literally any other hooved mammal that we don't know too much about. Most of the drawings look something like this, where yeah, it's something that has 4 legs, fur, and a tail. Now, that said, it does get pretty exciting compared to this. So we're going to take this base model and we're going to upgrade it. And the first upgrade we're going to make, evolutionarily, is we're going to look at this dent in front of the eye socket. So Merycoidon, very common, not that exciting, has a little tiny dent in front of its eye. Oreodont, on the other hand, takes that to a whole new level. That dent in front of the eye is almost as big as the eye socket, which is exciting because these giant preorbital fossa are also found in other animals, which means we know what they do. They're found in things like muntjacs, they're found in duiker antelope, and they are really big because they house giant, disgusting stink pits. Yes, these are things for scent glands or for sacs of yucky goo that they use to scent mark other things. Now, I know what you're saying. I would love to see more pictures of stink pits, and I will show you them because I found a lot of gross ones on the internet this week. So, more stink pits. Prepare yourself emotionally for this one. You could be drawing things that look like this, guys. Aren't these cute? Yeah, they're really adorable. And on the upper right-hand corner, we have a muntjac. By the way, that flap, that big old stink pit, they can take it and they can turn it all the way inside out like a pocket of goo in order to better scent mark on things. That's interesting. The blue duiker on the left-hand side looks surprised that its scent glands are that big. It looks like somebody has glued fuzzy oranges to its face. That sounds fun to draw and try to make look realistic. I'm sure it will look really stupid because it looks really stupid in real life. So Oreodont definitely had pretty big scent glands. It was probably using them to mark territory, just like these animals do today. And these animals live relatively solitary lives. They're not herd animals, by and large. But that doesn't mean that all Oreodonts were loners. Not all of them were. So let's take the basic model of Merycoidon and upgrade it again to make it meaner. And that's how you get Primericochirus. Primericochirus is not that much larger. Most Oreodonts were pig-sized or smaller. Primericochirus's head is way oversized in comparison to its body, which can make it kind of difficult to draw. I've seen a lot of really small pin-headed Primericochirus drawings out there. But the thing that makes Primericochirus really exciting and also incredibly vicious and mean is these giant cheekbones. So if you take a look at their skull from above, we've got Primericochirus on the left, a vicuña in the middle, and a giant forest hog on the right. And you'll notice that, really big cheekbones on Primericochirus. Pretty weird. They actually curl all the way back and flare up. They're functionally like antlers, but they're not antlers. They're made out of the cheekbone. If you made your cheeks into antlers, you would have Primericochirus-style cheekbones. There aren't other animals that do this. Hippos may have wide faces. They don't do this weird curly Q thing. Giant forest hogs may have inflated cheekbones, but they inflate it in the front to protect their eyes. There's no eye protection going on for these particular cheekbones. They also have very big fangs, Primaricochirus does. And Primaricochirus's cheekbones are more than just gigantic. They're also kind of gross. A lot of them have this nasty, bubbly texture. A lot of them will have little pit marks and scratches. And of course, a lot of them have gigantic bite marks taken out of them and big holes. In this case, and in many cases, they are healed. So this animal lost a big chunk of its face and then just kept on living, which is kind of the story of Primaricochirus. Because their heads are full of a lot of different types of ouchies. So on the upper left-hand corner, we have cheekbone malunion, where the zygomatic arch has come apart. I'm not convinced 100% that this actually happened while the animal was alive, but I've seen enough of them at this point that it makes me suspect it. And fun fact, this can happen to you. If you happen to get a very specific type of plastic surgery to thin your face, and that surgery doesn't go very well, your masseter muscle can actually pull your own face bones apart, sort of like this. So that's fun and good nightmare fuel for when you run out of dentistry dreams. There's also lots and lots of holes on all of these Oreodonts. This one has a gigantic bite mark again with a bone spur that's been kind of pulled down and grown outside the bottom of it. That one is a baby, which is kind of sad. The one on the bottom left has a bone callus, which is another word for bone band-aid. So it broke its face and then was rehealing it before it died. And then, of course, you get icky texture, which is also called periosteal reaction if you want to be like technical about it. And even though the one on the top here is a bite mark, the hole on the bottom right is not. Because a lot of these holes, a lot of these punctures were not bite marks. They were drainage holes where pus would seep out because a lot of these animals had infected face bones. So many of them, by the way, that I would say most of these were leaking pus at any given time if you looked at a herd of Primaricochirus, because they were giving themselves really nasty cases of osteomyelitis, which is also known as a bone infection. You can diagnose osteomyelitis while looking at bones by looking for things like weird kind of filigree texture, so it looks kind of delicate and lumpy. Sometimes those lumps are like little snake shapes. And holes, obviously, because those holes form when the bone swells due to the pressure of pus on the inside, and that pus leaks out of those drainage holes. All right. Now, if you didn't think that was disgusting enough, I am going to show you what this looks like in modern animals. So close your eyes for the next slide if you don't want to see that. But ready? Here we go. So there's not a lot of cases of the exact same type of osteomyelitis, but there is something called actinomycosis or lumpy jaw, which happens a lot to North American herbivores. And it is something where you get like cheatgrass is really a common problem here, where you get this really sharp needle of grass in an animal's mouth, and it punctures into the mouth, and that brings their own native mouth bacteria into the flesh of their face. And it causes really massive infections, which can lead to bone remodeling, which gives them that lumpy look. And then if the lumps get bad enough, like you see on here, you get pussy drainage holes. That's what those are. Yay. All right. So how frequently this happens is kind of shocking in Oreodonts. They were not probably getting this through ingesting cheatgrass or ingesting, razor blades. They probably were getting mouth bacteria into their faces from other Primaricochirus. All right, we're back to the safety slide. You can open your eyes again. So lots and lots of Oreodonts have, lots and lots of Primaricochirus have these zygomatic injuries. These include lots of them. I looked at 54 specimens, I think, for this particular study. There's a bunch of bone calluses. There's a bunch of misaligned, malunion zygomatic arches. Tons of them have holes, and most of those holes are on the cheekbones. So these animals are kind of living terrible lives just generally, but those terrible lives seem to be really concentrated on those gigantic antler-shaped zygomatic arches, which is pretty consistent with some form of infraspecific defense or competition. I think these animals were probably biting one another, and we do find them preserved together to a certain extent in herds. And that does lead me to another point, which is even though these animals did play pretty extensive bitey face with one another, there are some examples of non-toxic masculinity, like these three older gentlemen. So they have pretty wide faces, which suggests that they're probably the male version of this species. They all have arthritis, so they're probably pretty old. And they curled up and died together in a sandstorm. Just the world's most dedicated throuple, super cute, and also a little sad because, paleontology is always sad when you realize that these animals died this way. But there is something that is even a little bit funnier about this than the idea that, well, I guess it's not very funny that they died. But what is funny is that they are missing a very specific part of their body. When I went to the Carnegie Museum and saw these three particular specimens, I thought it was just this really beautiful, sad story of these animals cuddling together and trying to make it through a storm. It turns out that they're all missing their butts, which is not something that is explained at the Carnegie Museum. You have to go and look at the literature in order to realize that those are not present. They don't have tails because probably their butts were still sticking out of the sand dunes after they died, and their butts got eaten. So, yeah, Oreodonts are, they're silly. Even when you're trying to tell a beautiful, sad story about them, their butts got eaten. They're goofy. And some of them got more than just their butt eaten, and that includes things like Bathygenes. Bathygenes is a small, about cat-sized Oreodont. It's one of the kind of older ones. It's in the Eocene. These are from Texas, and they have a lot of bite marks. Bathygenes appears to have been very, very tasty because pretty much all of the specimens I've ever seen have had some point of bite mark or crunched skull. And Bathygenes is accumulated in some places in really, really large numbers, like Reeves Bone Bed. Reeves Bone Bed is not a famous fossil locality, but it absolutely should be. It's an incredibly dense bone bed in West Texas. It is 25 meters by 6 meters by 1 meter. It's full of fossils, including 157 specimens of Bathygenes. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say specimens? I meant endocasts. There's 157 loose sand brains of this animal in a very, very small section of space. The most common fossil at this locality is sand brains of Oreodonts. And I don't have time to let that sink in because I only have, another 10 minutes to convince you that Oreodonts are really cool. So let's keep going. Okay, not even 10, it's like 5. Speaking of dying with your friends, Minikikiris is another really common Oreodont. It's found in groups, so maybe with social. It's like Mericoidodon, but it's cuter. And it's often found in nodules, which some people have proposed are burrows. Are they actually burrows? Maybe not, I don't know. But they have been proposed to have lived in these burrows and made these burrows themselves. But they have hooves, so I don't know that that's necessarily true, but when I asked Bob Bacher about it, he told me that he thought that they had stolen burrows from Stylemes, and that's why Oreodonts never made it outside of North America. Don't think that's probably super realistic, but it does sound super cute and fun to draw. Not all of these animals did have hooves. You do have some things like Agriacuris, which had claws. It has claws on its front feet and on its back feet. It has arms intended for climbing because it lived a life in the trees, like a red tree kangaroo. So yeah, we've got burrowing potential Oreodonts, definitely tree climbing Oreodonts, and of course, some of them maybe also tried the water. We have Sespia lepticenia, which don't necessarily look super aquatic. I don't know why this one is resting like a little mermaid, but they have faces that look very much like beavers. So some people have thought that maybe the reason the eye sockets have moved all the way up to the top of the head is not just for fun, it's for an aquatic lifestyle. But again, these animals have hooves. A lot of the theories about Oreodonts are really undermined by the state of their feet. Maybe they had webbed feet with hooves. I don't know, but that does sound kind of funny to draw. And then the last group of Oreodonts is all of the various Oreodonts that got really jealous of tapirs. There's a lot of trunk envy in Oreodonts. And for the next few slides, I am going to put googly eyes on absolutely everything so that you can actually tell where their eyeballs are, because the second you put a trunk on a skull, it kind of looks like it's melting. So lots of different types of trunks. It's not just elephant trunks, but you do get lots of trunks that are intended like elephant trunks for picking things up and for selectively picking blades of grass. But you also get trunks like in the saiga, which are meant for dust filtration. There are trunks meant for thermoregulation, and of course for being very sexy to other animals and for making sound. And if you look at the osteological characteristics of these animals, anytime that you want to know if something had a trunk, it just kind of loses its face bone because it needs space in order to see around the giant flesh flap that it's going to put on its skull. So yeah, if you have nose bones that go bye-bye, you probably have a trunk. And depending on what happens to the rest of the skull, you might be using that trunk for more muscular things or not. So flexible, strong trunks, they have really, really strong, robust bony structures. They'll have big holes for nerves. But anything where you're not really flopping it around too much, Saiga could barely twist it from side to side, you kind of just don't have that. You look super, super delicate instead. And when you look at the different types of Oreodonts, there are different patterns of trunk development in different Oreodonts. Some of them, like Brachycrus, probably had a very tapir-like trunk where they were trying to pick things up. Some of them kind of didn't. Some of them probably had things like Saiga and Dictyx. So Mericurus and Eustatocurus don't really have quite as much of that bony structure support for really strong trunks. So their trunks looked even stupider than regular trunks. I've included these illustrations, but these are not as dumb as these things probably looked. They probably were big, fleshy, weird flaps, and I would love to see more drawings of those. And then Brachycrus just kind of looks exactly like a tapir skull. So, in kind of conclusion, basically, if it's physically possible to do, an Oreodont did try to do it. That's the evolutionary story of Oreodonts. They couldn't make their own, they made their own stink pits, really, really big ones. They couldn't make their own antlers, so instead they made their cheekbones into antlers, and then they made them leak pus because they like to bite one another. A lot of them developed trunks. And ecologically, they did a lot of things too. We've got our basic ground-dwelling ones, whether they lived alone or lived with friends. But you've also got ones that lived up in the trees and had claws. You've got ones that put eyes on the top of their heads and maybe lived in water. And then you have the ones that were really small and are constantly found in burrows, which might just mean that they were eaten by things that lived in burrows. Or it might mean that they burrowed themselves. I don't know, because we haven't really finished that research. I haven't, that's not my research, but it's not been published because there's a lot of stuff to do with Oreodonts. And generally speaking, you can kind of go nuts because whatever you draw is probably correct. And I want to say that that is the end, except that it's kind of funny that I followed the Spinosaurus talk, because while I was making this talk, I did want to prove that Cespia, the maybe aquatic, maybe not one, is like the Spinosaurus of Oreodonts. And I found this conclusive piece of evidence. So that's it. That's all I've got. The end.
Thank you very much, Meaghan. I did not know about this very new and exciting data you have there, but that, yeah, no, I mean, everything you talked about is exactly the reason we put your talks next to each other, because it's, it's
it's clearly the Spinosaurus. Yeah, I did at one point make a Twitter bot that responded to anybody who talked about Spinosaurus with an Oreodont fact, but I got blocked immediately.